Hi everyone, thank you for joining me. This is the Modern Maker Workroom, and this lesson is about the faldellin, which is a 16th and 17th century petticoat, typically worn directly over the shift or chemise. It's not a garment that would be seen on the outside. This is kind of an underwear garment. The first thing we're going to do is the layout. And you'll see that I've already got the lines drawn on the fabric, and that's just so that I need to do less explanation for you. I will tell you exactly how each line is laid out, but I also want you to be able to see what the layout is as we're doing it, so that each line makes sense. We begin with the cut edge of the fabric to our right. We're going to work right to left in laying this garment out. The typical rule is you put the widest end of the garment toward the cut edge of the fabric because it wastes less fabric that way. So in this instance, we have a huge hem because it's a half circle. So we put that hem against the cut edge. I'll begin by making a mark right here, and then I'll lay the length of the front in place. Now the length of this skirt, if you'll refer to your diagram, the length of the skirt is 1 1/4 vara. Now the way that we lay that out is we will place the 0 on the mark that we make here, and we'll lay the tape out along the fold, and we see our bada mark right here, the letter B, and then we're going to swing this tape around and we're going to line the Q up with the B, adding an additional 1/4 to the length. That's where we'll make our mark, and that tells us where the waistline begins. So the next thing we'll need is then to mark these lines right here in order to draw the waistline. And for that, we'll need to use the waist tape. So I'll set the length tape aside over here. We'll come back to it in a moment. And I will place the 0 end of the waist tape right at that mark that I made delineating the front. And then I will measure 1 dedo less than M. So on your diagrams, it should say W-IM. The I being before the M means that it is 1 less than M. It reads like Roman numerals. So if I've got the 0 here, then I will shift the 0 to the 1, and then I can make a mark right at M, which makes it nice and clear, so you're not guessing where that mark should go. It just gives you a spot to mark off of very clearly. And we'll use that exact same measurement to plot this way. So I have IM, and that's where I will make the mark for the waist here. Once that's complete, then I'll want to draw the waistline. And the easiest way to do that is to treat this tool like a compass. So I'll put my chalk on my tape, or put my tape on my chalk like this so that there's a little corner sticking out. If you're using a pencil to draw this out, same principle. You can place the end of the pencil right on that 0. Here's a pencil. You'll just place the tape on the pencil and you'll hold it in place, just like so. I'm doing this with chalk, so I'm going to bring my chalk back into play. And then I will lay this corner right on the mark that I made. Plant my thumb here at the corner along the fold, and then I will use this as a compass to cast the curve of the waist. And that gives us this beautiful, perfect curve. It gives us something clean to measure off of to get the length of the rest of the skirt. That is using your tools wisely. That's the only thing that we need the waist tape for. We're going to return now to using the length tape. Before we move on to this section up here, we'll need to finish marking out the hem of the skirt. And to do that, we'll measure perpendicular to this waistline. Since we know it's an actual half circle, then all lengths from the waistline to the hem, if they're measured perpendicular to the waistline, those should all be 1 1/4 vara. So we'll begin by using the same technique, and I'm measuring this as perpendicular as possible to this little segment of the waistline right here. So this should be a 90-degree angle where the tape is. So I'm going to go vara and then I'm going to swing the end of the tape around, line the Q up with the B, and then make a mark at 0. And I will do this several times along this portion of the fabric from here to here, and then connect the dots with the chalk. In order to do this smoothly, I recommend, instead of trying to draw carefully or work from this side, stand at the edge of the table. I've got my hip right against the edge of the table. If you're doing this on the floor, it's going to be a little bit more awkward, but you can still use a similar technique. I'm going to plant my chalk, and then I'm just rocking back with my body rather than trying to draw with my arm and hand. This is all kept quite rigid so that I just rock backwards and it smoothly draws that curve in place. And that way, when I'm cutting, I'm not fighting a jagged line to try to guess what the smoothest direction is. Okay? Now I'm going to shift the fabric down so that I can start showing you how to draft the center back and the gore that attaches to this portion. Before I do though, we'll need to measure this line right here because we need that measurement in order to draft the section that goes over here, okay? So the easiest thing to do is take your chalk, give yourself a visual guideline for the seam allowance. You can't cut right to this edge because that's not where you're sewing. That's part of the seam allowance. You're sewing here to the inside of that selvage. And the selvage is an already finished edge, so why damage it? Why cut it off? We want to keep it so that when we're sewing together, we have that much less finishing to do at the end of this garment. So I've marked myself a little bit of a line here. I'm going to take my length tape and I'm just going to measure. The same way that we plotted out the center front, I can use the same technique to measure what this distance is. So I'll place the 0 here. I'll measure to the B, and then I'll swing the tape around. And I have B plus T plus 1.5 dedo. So I'll write that as L, so I know I'm using the length tape, dash BT half. And half is just written 1/2 like a normal fraction. And I will write that directly on the fabric so that I have a very quick reference and can just look right at it when I need to draw the next portion of the garment. Okay, give me just a moment. Let me shift this fabric down. We have our waistline curve. I've talked about drawing the waistline curve. We've drawn all of that. Now, I didn't mention that we should just draw a straight line all the way across here. So take your ruler and you are going to start with the top of that little triangle that we cut for the waist, or we drew for the waist, and you'll follow it along all the way to the far edge. This is the center back of the garment right here, and I've labeled it CB for center back. The next thing we need to do is measure this length so that we know how much more we have to cut in order to complete the length of the garment. So I'll lay the tape measure down, 0 at my seam allowance mark here, and then to this waist mark here, which is M plus half, so that's half the length of the tape plus half a dedo. So I'll document that again by writing directly onto the fabric, L, M, half. That tells me that it's half the vara plus half a dedo. So whatever remains after this is taken away from 1¼ vara, that's the length that has to be drawn for the remainder of the seam. Now, if these were paper patterns, the trunk of the main body of the skirt will be over here, and I would have a wedge-shaped pattern piece over here, and I would butt them right up next to each other. Remember that for the most part, seam allowances are already included in these pattern measurements, so you don't have to worry about leaving a margin between the pieces. They can come right next to each other, and it helps conserve fabric. So this line that we drew, which was essentially the final line of this pattern piece, is now the first line that we've drawn of the wedge that we have to cut to match up to this. So I'm measuring here I have 1.5. Now I know that I need bada and 1/4. So now I'm going to put that same mark here, and I have my bada there. And now I swing the end around so that I know where the 1/4 is. And that is the length of the piecing that needs to go on. Now I'll take that measurement that I made along the far side, along the selvage, and I'll measure from here out to this point, and that gives me the full width of this wedge. Now, when we did that measurement, it was 1 bada plus 1/3 plus 1.5 dedo. So we'll just mark all of those out one at a time. Bada, here. Then 1/3 is here. And then 1.5 dedo is to here. And then we know exactly what that piece should be shaped like. Now, all that remains is for me to draw this curve along the hem. Now, I've eyeballed this. If you're working with a paper pattern, you're going to cut your paper pattern or have something to trace off of to be able to get this curvature. So I just hand drew this curve, and I start by doing a little bit of a dotted line here, a little bit of a dotted line here, and I will just draw them until they match up and I can see a nice smooth line.